so much, Gisue.
Hi, how are you? You're good?
I'm fine, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
I don't want to
I'm
have my.
feeling this little sunset here on my face, but it's
I.
fine.
It's a nice photographic effect.
I know it's true. It's true. Well, first and foremost, thank you so much for doing this, be part of this talk. As I told you before, this is a celebration of this website. It turned 16 this year, and it's also like a sort of an expression of this quarantine period that we're living. We have to share our knowledge, share experiences, and talk about architecture. And also because I mean it's you. You're part of a firm, architect firm that it really amazes a lot of young people, especially students that are looking forward to see your work. So I truly appreciate your time, your humbleness to accept this talk because I know it's not sort of a easy to accept to an unknown person, But I truly appreciate
I'm
the time
trying
you
to
take.
make my light better. Okay. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
No, it
Um,
looks great.
Lois, thank you so much. I am. It's an honor and pleasure to be with you. What are you talking about? So I'm happy and want to wish everybody a happy Friday, to our colleagues, to our friends, young architects, especially our rebel women architects. I see.
Yeah.
I see we are also connected with our rebels in Italy. Everyone in Chile, thank you for spending the time with us. Um, this is very, very precious that Lewis is doing this, um, because we were discussing, there is nothing better um, to meet architects, because we know a lot of architecture, we know a lot of buildings, but we hardly meet the architects themselves, except a few that we only, again, know through pictures,
Yeah.
but never hear their voice unless they come and lecture or they visit us. So this is very, very, I think, important. And that's why I have made myself available to meet as many people as I can, and hopefully come together as a world community, and not just as architects and students of architecture who are competing with one another. I think we should really, really take the chance at this time, um, to come together as opposed to separate. It's together but far away from one another.
Yeah.
um, Hope you all stay safe, and I hope that you all stay healthy um, in these kind of pandemic times.
I wish the same thing to you in New York as well. And you talk a lot about getting together, about being connected during these very tough times we're living and we're facing right now. And architecture, it's all about being connected. It's all about working in teams. And
Correct.
in that case, you have a very good team. You're part of a very good team because you work with your sister.
Yes.
And and
Yes,
I want to
that's
go back in time. I want to go back to the early beginnings of your work. Um, because
okay.
you were born in Iran, which is a very beautiful country that I'm looking forward to to visit. And but you started a very young age. You started with architecture, with the interest in architecture. So, how was the beginning? Where did you have this idea of studying architecture or getting to know architecture? I don't know.
um, Honestly, I have no idea, how I decided, to become an architect, because um, normally either someone in a family is an architect, from what I can see is, your family, you have to have architects or doctors to become a doctor, or you have some special mentor or teacher or someone that guides you to become an architect. um, I have neither one of those. There were no women architects that I knew of when I was growing up, and there are very few even today as I am grown up.
That's
So
true.
there was no role model. I mean, who do I see that I say, oh, she's fantastic, or look at what she's made, and I want to become an architect? So there was no one. um, but I think where I grew up, Iran, and I do invite you, and I hope one day again, many of our friends and colleagues can come to Iran when, it's safer and politically it's more quiet. And it's a beautiful, it has an amazing architecture. The impact of architecture, I think, is unavoidable. So, it's like 5,000 years of history of building and innovating and making craft. And, one of the earliest urban spaces in the world is in Iran. You don't appreciate it until you come abroad, and then they read it in history books. And so architecture is very ingrained. It's very consequential because of the separation of genders. There were the interior space that was for women, exterior space that was for men, a lot of mosques. The lower, larger halls are for men to come and do prayers. Women have a balcony and very kind of a limited area, so they wouldn't be seen. So, you keep noticing it, and you become aware that the way architecture is set up is talks about society, talks about religion, it talks about, and beyond that, it's just the art of making architecture, the handmade tile works of those turquoise colors, and the forms and shapes of these adobe earthen buildings. It just was, I think, ingrained in you, and you wanted to contribute towards that. And so at age 12, I told my parents I want to become an architect, and they didn't mind. I had very progressive parents, and because they thought girls and women have to be educated. But I'm not sure if today they are very happy that I studied architecture, because I spent all my time doing work. And worse than that, my sister became an architect, so the two of us are never available, And so it's very special because, the way we learned architecture actually was, it's a field that is not about one thing. It's a field that is about many things. I mean, almost like you have to be a philosopher, you have to be an artist, poet, inventor. I mean, I equated architecture with invention. You create something new. And so that was the mindset that we both had. We're going to come together and make all these amazing things. However, the earlier on, when we were children, we also, because of my father being an engineer in the Iranian oil company, we were, in the southern part of Iran, which is not the center, is not the capital city. And it's basically a very large field of desert where the oil fields are. And so there was almost like nothing around us except the desert. Yeah. Like no museums, no stores, no cultural centers. And so we learned from very early on to become very observant about nature. And I joke, but it's not a joke. We found snakes and, run after them. We found, crickets and how they jump. We found many creatures, in our area, and started kind of, becoming, they were our friends, they were our toys. And I think that had a very big impact in terms of understanding the world. Also, this vastness of earth and sky with one line separating from one another, I think creates this kind of this is, it's beautiful. So it creates some kind of a, very minimal, in a way, landscape. There is not a whole lot, I would say, to litter it or to occupy it. It's just earth, and then there is sky, and there is a line in between. So it was very drastic, very beautiful. And so you can see in one of the photographs the way they had learned, because it was so dry and arid area, they had learned. Yeah, so here you see the mosaics on the domes. So imagine this very contrast between the adobe or earthen architect buildings, but then having such an elaborate dome or such colored glass where when the sun hits it, it comes in. It's, you know, it's almost impossible even make these kinds of patterns that are constantly changing with time and the way sun comes in. You know, even with computers today, it's, you can sit there for hours and just you know, observe these patterns and observe these beautiful, you know, kind of architecture. So that's kind of our start, and we always kind of go back to that beginning, you know, a very simple, very environmental oriented beginning that we
Yeah,
have.
and I can imagine that you had a lot of influences from what you saw in your city, and in terms of, for example, I don't know, the history. I mean, I have made some research, and especially in Tehran, there's a lot of historical buildings from a lot of periods of time, not only very old buildings, but also modern architecture from the 40s, from the 50s, from the 60s. That's very interesting because I've seen the Docomomo Iran Docomomo Iran website, and it's very good, and
Right.
they have been doing a great job. Congratulations to Docomomo Iran for what they
Yeah,
do, showcasing the heritage of that beautiful country.
right.
And well, but you both studied architecture, so you were both with the same kind of feelings towards creation, or doing something different with with your life. And how was the change? I mean, from Iran to New York to start architecture in Cornell, for example. How was the experience from going to Iran to US?
That's right. So, you know, around when we started college, the idea was, okay, now we can, you know, go and gain knowledge from abroad and come back and build our country. Iran was becoming very fast, kind of modernized and becoming a modern building, a modern country. So there were a lot of need for engineers and architects, and a lot of people we knew were studying that in order to contribute and build the country towards this kind of a new era. And so, yeah, I mean, it was, we came to United States and eventually ended up both in the same college, in the same, you know, at Cornell University, and studying the same thing, which was great because it helped us to continue what I say, this kind of a game that children have, and this kind of a dialogue or conversation from childhood continuous to, you know, kind of architecture school. The change was very surprising because, um, oh, the change was very surprising because coming from Iran, that was considered an underdeveloped country, my my feeling was now we are going into a very developed country. But as we stayed and as we became part of this new country, United States, and part of New York in specific, we realized that there are so many difficulties and issues in every society and every country, especially the young and new ones. Um, the fact that this kind of a systemic, um, you know, racism and sexism and injustice is now coming out after there have been riots and there have been demonstrations all over the world, not only in the United States. I think it proves and shows that um, we have to be very careful the way we look at other cultures and other people and other traditions and other beliefs. I think one has to respect all, even if you disagree with it, you don't need to continue it. And I always tell people actually who follow us on social media and on Instagram, if you don't like what you hear and if you don't like what we do, you don't really need to get mean and nasty. All you have to do is, sign off. I mean, I don't go around and ask people to follow us. I'm doing the best I can because I think as an architect, we have a responsibility to make the environment and our world better. And now is the time, for us all to come together as opposed to, again, spread negative energy in the world. We don't need that.
Yeah, that last phrase you said about we as architects, we have to make our environment much better. I think it's very powerful, and it's really important to be serious about it. I mean, we have to work together as architects to make the world much better. I mean, it sounds like a typical phrase or something, but it's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
It's
And
true.
I know time goes by very quickly, and I want to ask you about your first works. I mean, which one do you consider is like the first goal that you did with your sister working together as a team? I know that the firm was established in 1986, so you started working.
I am
Yeah, it's
old.
been a
Look, my
while.
hair is
It's
all
been a
gray.
while. It's been a while.
Yes. The work, I mean, it's 35 years, 38 years of work. We've done a lot, but we started with thinking, as we were two young women, and we were Iranian at the time that, there were political difficulties between United States and Iran. So we were basically on our own, and we had to start somewhere while we were working for different offices to gain knowledge of construction and detailing and understanding how to put a building together. We also continued our education, which was conceptual thinking and coming up with ideas and projects that we were interested to do. And so there are many, many projects. I mean, we already have like 4 books of architecture, which, I can brag about. Because from very early on, I realized when we were students at the university, when you go to the library of the College of Architecture, there are no books on women architects, or there were no books at that time. Now there are more, but still not enough, in my opinion. Again, there are now more books about women architects who have male partners, or are part of a team of many male partners, which is great. And I have said this is the first stepping stone, but my hope is that we're going to have a whole rack or part of a library where you go and say, okay, I'm looking for women in architecture who've done great work. Who can I find? Who can I see? What can I read about them? And what their ideas come from. And so that's why from very early on, we started documenting our work. And, luckily, like as we were winning awards, the publishers came and tried to put these in books, which is fantastic because now we have them to share with our students, to share with our staff, to share with our clients. So that's something I want to, encourage you. You're doing almost that with social media. I think you should encourage colleges of architecture or sponsors of architecture to put some funding where, someone could help, great women architects to put their work together in a book form. So it becomes available later on, because you're talking about teaching history. How does history gets passed on? Through writings and through books. And
It's true.
I always say it's been pretty unfair, I would say, towards women. So nothing you can do. All you can do is concentrate and keep going with your own work.
it's very important what you said about going to the library and check out some books and take a look at architectural history and looking for someone you can admire as well. In my case, I mean, if we focus on one thing that I work a lot, and I know Francesca works a lot in Italy as well, which is the position of women in architecture.
Right.
There are not, I mean, to me, I never heard about a women architect when I was studying architecture. It was a Hadid, of course, and Lina
That's
Bobardi, which were like the most important female figures. But what about Chilean female architects? What about other Latin American Chilean architects? And
correct.
and I think it's important to say that, okay, there's a lot of women architects all over the world doing incredible things, not only in architecture field like the traditional, projecting a building or something, but also in terms of urban planning, interior design, this object design, furniture, I don't know. And I think that's very valuable of your firm with your sister because you have managed to do something beyond the traditional view of architecture. And if we see your projects on your website, we see a wide range of different kind of buildings, stores, pavilions, and the interior design, which is fabulous as well. Um, even a sort of a lighting system.
Right.
so so it's very there's a lot of diversity in your work because the thing is, and I want to let you talk, but it's about every project is quite similar, but they're not the same. Each
Right.
project has their own identity.
Right.
So yeah,
Well,
I
we
want to talk
we
about that.
yeah, Louis, when we began to start our professional work, we realized that somehow most architects um, recognizable architecture. So this way, they people who liked one, then they could buy that kind of architecture and repeat it. It's almost like creating a logo or a brand. So we rejected that from very earlier on because we were like, this is ridiculous because it's like creating one size or one style that fits everybody. Or again, coming from where we are, we realize the climate is amazingly different in different parts of the world. The culture, the histories are different. How could you have the same architecture, in Chile and then have it in in Houston, Texas, and then have it, in Tehran? But that's what we were getting, this kind of a one thing, one fashion that fits all. Um, in fact, I think fashion doesn't fit all either. Fashion for each body is different, for each person is different, for each culture is very different, and it's not our position to create one thing that everybody that we hope that anyway. So that was a very conscious decision on our end, that every project, we first of all respect the environment we go in. We study the site, the nature around it, we study the climate, we study the culture, we study the kind of an invisible wisdom of that place, and try to bring those essences into the project and see if we can each time create a new project. But at the same time, this our influence for doing it all, if you will, it comes from masters of architecture that we studied. I have to say, um, we were very much influenced by Frank Lloyd Wright because we read somewhere that Frank Lloyd Wright's modernism, in fact, was influenced, and also Le Corbusier's from Iran, from their travels to Iran, because they found or they discovered this kind of a um, roof structure where people can live in. And because all the roofs in Iran were flat, and in the nighttime and in the summertime, people would go on their roofs and kind of, talk to one another, if you wish, flirt sometimes with one another, and live there because it was cooler and it was above the ground. And so this kind of, influences that modernists had taken from a country that I very familiar and come from, was brought me back to them. And they're all architects who do holistic work. You know, Corbu Alvarado means, you know, right. They did interiors. They never allowed anyone to touch their interiors. Not only they connected the interior and exterior of their buildings, they started designing their own furniture. I mean, their furniture now is on the stock, on the market, you know, for people to buy. Some are reproduced. We have used them in many of our own projects. But it follows the same philosophy. It follows their own articulation of form. And it's pretty much becomes one thing. It's one continuous thought. Frank Lloyd Wright, I read the story that even designed the night slippers of his client. I mean, how crazy and detail-oriented you have to be to even do fabrics and, you know, everything. You have to be crazy. As an architect, I think you have to understand that things are not separated from one another. It's one continuous line and continuous life and continuous thought. And so that is what we have tried to explore. That's why, you know, for me, like, I design jewelry the same way we design our buildings, the same way we have designed our, you know, urban master plans. It's the same kind of rigor and thinking and connection between kind of built form and natural, you know, nature, and also between spaces in between and how different materials come together. And so, yes, I mean, thank you for bringing this up. Our main goal has been to be able to have a holistic approach, and often enough, you know, we have encouraged our clients to work with us on a totality of the project, even if it means just designing a light fixture or a ceiling fixture, or, you know, a piece of built-in furniture, because it continues. And those who've done it, they are very happy and understand how important it is to do that. It takes a lot of time. Unfortunately, in most schools of architecture, and in fact in corporate firms of architecture, this is all divided up. When you enter as a young architect, they put you in a team that either does only design or does only, they call, you know, construction drawings, or only mechanical drawings. And I think that's very unfortunate. That's very unfortunate. An architect needs to know it all. And even if you don't practice it all, but at least in your own mind, you know how these are all related. Imagine if somehow you were creating a human being and only you could do the head and have no idea of what the rest of the body looks like. Or, you know, you would only do the hair like mine, and, you know, not know how the ears look. I mean, it's mind-boggling for me. But that is what my experience was when I entered into the field of architecture. And the reason we started our office was to give young architects an opportunity that didn't exist. There are very few small offices like ours that try to continue the education of an architect, try to allow an architect experience how an idea becomes a building, and how what they have learned from architecture schools eventually, you know, could have an impact in the world of architecture, as opposed to only know or learn only one segment of architecture. Louis, I have to tell you, after I graduated from school, there was a very bad economic, as it is now happening again, recession in the United States. I had no idea what it was. You know, I was a student, I finished, I thought I'm gonna come out and and I came out from graduated from a very important and well-known architecture school. I thought wherever I go, I'm gonna find a job, an internship or, a beginning job. And not only that, I thought, oh, I'm going to end up just doing amazing buildings. And, I thought they're going to put me on a team to do a museum and so on. I had no idea what was waiting for me, which is also very interesting because we don't teach that in schools of architecture. Architects have no idea when they get out what is going to happen. So I was very, very disappointed because I couldn't find a job. And finally, did a lot of little internships here and there for the architects that I admired. And eventually one of the architects guided me because they understood that I wanted to learn how to build how to see construction, because I didn't have that experience. So I ended up in the desert. First, I thought I'm going to go and visit Frank Lloyd Wright and stay at Taliesin, do work, and then be part of the Taliesin and learn from the master. But obviously Frank Lloyd Wright had passed at that time, but his wife Oligmana was running the studios, and she was sick. And when I got there, they told me, sorry, she has to interview everyone who comes in, and we cannot offer you a space. So here I am in the middle of the desert in Arizona, thinking I'm going to go work in this facility. They guided me to go to another amazing architect by the name of Paolo Soleri. Paolo Soleri was actually at that time doing sustainable buildings and sustainable ecologies, if you will. Fascinating place. I think you're hopefully, kids should, yes, learn, what these are. And so I ended up having a workshop there and spending a summer, which was very important, again, to reconfirm that Main Street architects and the mainstream thinking about architecture sometimes needs to be challenged and needs to find other ways of creating architecture. So that's my story in terms of living one more time in the desert with Paolo Soleri. But he was a very interesting man. He would walk around because it was so hot. I mean, at 120 degrees, with a little bikini, trying to tell us about his philosophies of architecture and these kind of ecologies.
Yeah. Well, what I'm showing right now, it's not one of your works. What I'm showing right now is Frank Lloyd Wright's Taliesin, which is a very important architectural. I mean, well, Frank Lloyd Wright, I think, has influenced so many generations of architects. Whether you like it or not, I mean, the man had a point of view in terms of architecture.
Yes.
And I have spoke to so many architects of different generations, and they all agree that there's sort of a sensibility in terms of how you see the notion of spaces, of designing spaces for living, which is very interesting. For living, I mean, how is going to be the house? How can you, I don't know, make the difference between a house, a building, or a home, or make you feel at home? And that is something that I want to ask you about, because as you were talking, I was showing a lot of pictures of your work in general, and there are a lot of buildings that you have designed with your sister that are about living. They're for living. How do you see the concept of living? What's important to you about that, about the living areas?
Well, we get, I mean, that's why you become an architect. I mean, you want to create living in terms of scale is very important, I think, and in terms of this kind of a relationship of interiors and exteriors is very important. And of course, depending on what it is, the connection between the architecture and nature then becomes important. And so we always want to create a work of art. We always want to create a piece of sculpture, if you will, but a piece of sculpture is not a home. It's not to occupy space. It becomes very important to turn something that is just purely work of art into something that is for living and for people, for human beings. This project that you are showing, for example, is basically a retreat, is a place in the country that you can see we are working with tactile materials, with natural materials, with very simple structures, because we were so touched by all the farm construction, by all the farm buildings in the area. And so there are always a lot of different volumes in a farm. It's a little place for the chicken, little place for, I don't know, animals, a storage silo, for the grains. Then there's the main house. And they're all very close to one another, but it's not one big structure. And so that's what we were trying to create here. All the elements that our client needed divided up into different, very simple volumes, almost as if there are old structures falling down. That's why there are these leaning walls, because we saw them actually in the neighboring areas. And a lot of these wooden old structures were almost falling, leaning. And so we said, well, even that could become an element in this brand new project, and we brought it in. And the client is very happy, they love it, and it ended up just being a very successful project that fits in.
I want to get to, well, about still with the concept of living, but there's several projects that you have done that are like a mixture between living, trying to connect to nature, trying to also connect to the urban area, which is very, I don't know, historical piece of urban area, which is this project located in Salzburg, the Jewels of Salzburg, which is a very
Yes.
important project. It's a well-known project worldwide, mostly because
Right.
of the dramatic shapes of each building, and also how you manage to dialogue between this huge landscape of rocks and green areas, and also that part of the city that's very historical with a lot of old buildings. And you created this contrast between the old and new, but also respecting nature and the scale.
Right.
You didn't surpass the height, you didn't create something huge or something like that. No, it's a very humble project.
That's correct. So this is a very important project for us, because it was, I think, the first maybe competition that we won in a prominent European city. And as you said, Salzburg is a very important historic town. It's small, but it's very beautiful, very nicely preserved. And then the claim to fame of it is that Mozart was born there. So it's a city of music. It's a city of musicians. It's a city of, a lot of music festivals. And so for us, in that sense, was something that was very, very important. But what we did more than anything else, again, is we respected the site. We went and saw it, and we thought about it a lot. And also we studied the city and the culture of Salzburg. And what we realized was the city itself is built around, or is dominated by these mountains, by these elements, natural elements that are these kind of rock face mountains. There is, I think, 4 or 5 of them around. And then there is this kind of a very beautiful river, Salzach River, that flows through the city. And the whole town is very dense, but is made out of these very small alleyways or courtyards. So you can almost go, pedestrians can walk through town, through these kinds of very small courtyards and under the buildings. There is always a passageway that you can go through or under a building and arrive into a courtyard and go through the other side and connect your way. There is a beautiful organic way that you don't have to really be in the street, but you meander or go under the buildings. So that was important. We thought, how can we create something modern that brings the same, in a way, respect and intensity to the project, where things are very close to one another. You can almost touch one another or touch the mountain. How could we allow a private development enjoy the mountain element, the rock face element, but at the same time give it back to town, because it belongs to them. It doesn't belong to people who spend a lot of money to live here. And the forest and the nature, how could now we bring that to kind of connect all these ideas we have? And so we did this master plan, which was fantastic, and what got accepted and made us win the competition for these 6 new buildings. And then there is a historically brewery vaults on the site that we had to also refurbish and make sure structurally safe and weave it in. And another building that then became an adaptive reuse, which was a commercial building that was on the street but adjacent to our site. And that had to also get renovated and be connected to the rest of the building. So see how many elements we had. We had the rock face, we had an existing building that we couldn't tear down and had to keep it because it was right on the street. And then we had these vaults that they were used for storing the beer, and then that also had to become part of it. So our idea was then to, we got inspired because we understood that some of the stone for the older buildings in Salzburg was provided by these mountains. These mountains were used almost as a quarry. And our site at one point was a quarry site. So this idea of cutting big rocks and then randomly, storing them on site was an image that came to mind. We said it has to be part of the place. It can't be something that, you transport from New York. And so even though originally we thought, we have to do a tower here, keep everything aside and do one big slick tower, like, we are from New York. But we threw that in the garbage. We just thought it's not going to work here. And in fact, a lot of people, a lot of cool architects had proposed the tower for you. And so it was very sensitive, very, moves that worked with one another. Here you can see, even creating perspectives between buildings so people from outside could look, visually connect to the rock and mountain.
And you can see how.
And you can see that. And so then the form, architecturally, the form of the buildings had to be like rock shapes or chiseled stone that was put, very carefully on site. And so, it was everything we wanted or we had already studied was going to be in this project. And the whole wrapper of these apartments, it's 100 apartments in the project, is stone. And the rest of it is different glass and, glazings that we use. It's a very sustainable building because energy codes in Salzburg are very high, and I think if I'm correct, the glazing here or the glass walls are like triple or quadruple layer. So it's not just like a double glaze or triple glaze. It had even another layer in the interior, and so you can see the element of river that belongs to the town. It allows the whole master plan to become a microcosm of the city of Salzburg. It didn't come from somewhere else. It's all here. It's their mountains, it's their river and water. And we imagined, there is this path. You can see it's kind of a rugged path by the edge of the rock face for the public to come and go through. So it's, in a way, nature has allowed the separation between the private part and public part, but at the same time connects everyone, either visually or, again, with the water. And we imagine in cold months when there is snow and icicles, they fall into the water and perhaps create their own formations, and one could even exhibit, somehow ice sculptures there. And in the evenings is just beautiful and very meditative. That was one of the ideas we had. Can architecture create a meditative space where, as a person, you experience something other than what is in front of you or what is next to you? Together, it creates this kind of an experiential realm, if you will. And I think this project, in that sense, also comes very close to what we wanted to do. This kind of so we were very, very pleased, and we're told that the residents who live there, every time we go there, come and thank us, and they tell us we've changed their lives. So I have many, many times asked, and I said, I hope for the better. And they said, oh, you cannot imagine. It's beautiful. So they get the magic of the place, which was something we wanted to show, how, and I think every part of the world has this. It's just architects have to learn to not speed up everything, but to take time to understand it, to understand the beauty of the place, to understand the culture of the place, to understand the history of the place, and then create something that is very unique and could only exist in that place. And it's not just like another glass block or modern building that repeats itself, or everybody lives into this banal apartment buildings that developers put up. So we were very lucky that the developer was very good. They definitely followed pretty much, to the dot, every drawing and detail that we created. And City of Salzburg actually has inspectors after the project has been signed off to come and make sure the builders are building it according to the drawings that was submitted. That was something new that I learned. I don't know if all European countries are that way, but our experience here was super fun and very, very exciting. So this kind of wood slats, in a way, relates back to the natural elements, to the trees you can see behind, that we bring into the project, because that's where you walk. That's at the level of human beings. So you feel wood, you feel this kind of a texture of trees that are surrounding the project. But then on top, these heavy rocks, like pieces of sculpture, are lifted up and are supported. And so you can see how they set up. And each building is different from the other. Not two of them are alike. And in a way, they view the rock, they view the mountain, the rock face, as an element that every morning, they can see and they can respect. And then on the other end, or from one side of the apartments, they also have views of the city of Salzburg, which is also equally beautiful. A lot of the apartments have terraces, whether like this one, or a roof terrace on top, or narrow slot of terraces between them. So there is this kind of a social activator element in the project as well, that we created, because we wanted to make sure everyone has outdoor space. A lot of outdoor spaces in modern architecture has ended up being just a, forgive my language, but a stupid balcony. I mean, what do you do in a 1 meter balcony? It becomes a garbage collector. People put their furniture or store something they don't fit inside. Again, from the country that we come from Iran, terraces are large. Rooftops, roof terraces, are for living. It's for outdoor living. It's not for storing, just a chair. And so most of the terraces that we have created here is quite substantial. And in the visits that we have made since it's been completed, most people have put furniture, dining table, lighting, and it's just beautiful to see it. Some of the roof structures that connect the buildings are all have green roof and grass covering, again, to continue this severe sustainability for the project, energy conservation and sustainability. There is 2 courtyards, and one large courtyard in one part of the site, and then there is a smaller courtyard on the other, where the whole community comes together. Sometimes they even invite the neighbors from across the street, because there is no gate here, so people cannot come in. Neighbors can come in with their dogs, and so it's this communal space, which nowadays, I think, after going to the pandemic, we see how important it is, because you need large open spaces for people to breathe, to come, to get fresh air, and so on.
Prefab folding pot. I think that's very interesting, because it's a very practical solution for housing in terms of different situations, and to create something that could be very useful and also not very to damage the environment. How was the idea of those prefab folding pots?
So we've been for a very long time thinking that like most art, we have been caught up in the world of what they call luxury projects, luxury apartments, luxury stores, luxury goods. And it was great and amazing, and we are thankful for having those projects. But I think as architects, we also have social responsibility. And when you realize that most of the projects that you make is really for 1% of the society that can afford it, it's something really disturbing. The number of homeless people, the number of refugees that are living in tents, the number of really people who live in poor conditions is beyond measure, I think. I mean, United Nations every day puts data out, so you can Google it and see it for yourself. So our idea was, how could we as architects sit and do nothing about it? Because obviously the countries are just going about their own way, and they have no funding, and So the first thing we thought we do is come up with an idea that could be easily prefabricated, so we can bring the cost down. And it would be a kind of, if you will, a simple DNA that then can be connected to one another to make larger units for larger families. Like the one that you see in this rendering is actually 2 units put together. Uh, and so, and then this idea that architecture should be the same for everyone because the construction of it is very similar. A luxury building, if you go and look in terms of construction, is the same um, for low-income housing to a luxury housing. The slabs, trust me, are the same thickness because they are minimum in concrete or in steel. Maybe the heights or the volumes become a little bit different. The amount of windows will become different. But construction-wise, more or less, we are really not differing from one to another. And so if that is the case, why can those who don't have much in life and we feel to have a home is a human right, how could they also have the same? There would be no difference. How could we, in a way, bring democracy into architecture and have the same unit for both luxury, because maybe they can add more, but the same one could be used for someone who doesn't have the means. And so this was the pod. And the way the pod works is based on the art of folding paper or origami. You know, the Japanese origami, how you take one sheet of paper and you fold it. And so we thought this way, if we can put a building together that can be folded, then it can move from one place to another. It could be shipped to areas that we need and so on. So right now we are making a prototype of a kind of more a version of it. It's not exact same one. It's a little bit smaller, which we want to use for disaster relief. Because as we were making this project, you know, there were fires in Australia where people are running without having anywhere to go. And, you know, they're surrounded by fire and there's no way to get to them anything except by ship. There are earthquakes, severe earthquakes all over the world. There is a whole town in Iran that was flooded, that needed shelter. I mean, you just name it, we have it. These, you know, almost climate change issues that we are facing. And again, we all need to come together to resolve, you know, made us to think that we definitely need this kind of what we call a pod, a very basic shelter that we can fold and you can ship or air freight from one place to another. And that is, you know, what we are now kind of getting into what we call a concept prototype. And we are hoping maybe to exhibit it in Venice Biennale, or right now we are talking about potentially even exhibiting it in London Architecture Festival, because it's very important. As we also were studying this pod, we were also studying communities, emerging communities. Maybe the whole planning needs to be revisited and changed. The one that you showed was our Alvan Tower that is in Tehran and it's very dear to us. Maybe we want to talk about that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this building in particular because it's in your home country, of course. Right. And I don't know what's going on, but it doesn't. There's something wrong with the website, with my internet.
Just click on it, and so the tower would come on. No, the projects in the projects. Yeah.
Okay, there it is.
Yeah, there. So this is one of the very few projects we've done in Tehran, and it was very, very dear to us. I mean, here we are finally in our own, you know, country of birth, and a place that we understand, you know, a lot about, and you know, had the opportunity to work with this developer. It's a 12-story office building. It's also one of the very few commercial buildings that we have done. And it's in a very dense urban fabric. It's by a very Argentine square. And so, it's an important project because it's very visible. And our clients wanted something iconic and something that would remain in Iran, for the future architects and future generations to look at. So all the elements were there, and it's a kind of what we did was it's very few of these kinds of double skin buildings exist in Iran because it's expensive to make. You have an interior kind of facade, and then you have an exterior facade, and it becomes a little bit more costly to make. But they are very important, and we wanted to emphasize that Iran gets a lot of sun, and the amount of energy that is used in cooling office towers that are all or mainly replica of what we get in United States and in Europe, in the Western world, perhaps is not the only solution. And so for us to cut the amount of sun that comes in, but still allow view, light, and air in, we did this. There is a layer that is glass in the interior, and then there is this brise soleil, or kind of a sun shading device on the exterior. So it became a lot of fun because with the brise soleil, we could actually create a pattern. And for the pattern of this building, we studied geometrical, kind of buildings that exist actually in a lot of, again, the tile work of Iran and a lot of the patterns in the Iranian, art. And so we understood that Iranians believe that the manifestation between intersection of a circle and a square. Square, I think, was a representative of the earth, and circle, the sky, or is manifestation of paradise. You create a cross where the Persian paradises, Chahar Bagh they call it, is based on that. And so that pattern is reflected on the facade of the exterior skin of the building. And, for us, it creates the paradise in the middle of the chaos and very old, badly needed renovated buildings in the middle of the commercial center in Tehran. What is fascinating is between the two layers, there is a 1 meter space. And this 1 meter space allows not only for the window cleaners to go in between and clean the glass from the outside and clean the facade, but it also allowed us to install LED lighting. So in a way, what is cut out or what is negative at night becomes positive. And it becomes a pattern of lighting tile work. Just like some of those, images that you showed earlier, where sun comes in and from the stained glass, you get all these patterns of beautiful colored light in the interior. This time it's the reverse. It's from the layers in between the building's facade, you give it back to the street and the pedestrians to see. It's almost like a piece of jewelry in the middle of that whole area. And it's very visible, and to me it's an icon of future generations of maybe Iranian architecture, something that belongs to there. It has a purpose, and it connects to the culture of Iran.
It's like a piece of jewelry. And you
Is.
have also designed jewelry as well. It's true. Well, there's something related to not exactly jewelry, but also fashion, which is something that really amazes me, is the Contemporary Museum of Muslim Fashion.
Right.
I love this. I just adore this grid that you designed. I'm pretty sure it's based on traditional or historical patterns that you can find in in Iranian art, I suppose, and you found the inspiration for doing something like this.
Yes, I mean, definitely these kinds of screens, if you will, and patterns on the doorways and, um, stained windows exist, in all of Middle East, I would say, but also in Iran. Um, and this actually was an exhibition that we designed in San Francisco at the Dion Museum for contemporary Islamic fashions. And it was fantastic experience because um, Islam is a very large, Islamic world is a very large world that has many different cultures that have their own traditions and have their own, in a way, culture and dress codes and so on. I mean, what you see in Indonesia is very different than what you get in Pakistan, or what you get in Iran, or what you get in Saudi Arabia. And so the challenge was, how could you design a space? How could you design um, architecture to include all these countries and bring them together? So for us, the main actually element that all these countries, or all these Middle Eastern countries, have in common is the element of arch, because arch is a protective element. It's a structural element. When there's an earthquake, they say run under the arch because that's where you're safe. And so we took the element of the arch, but then we deconstructed it. We modernized it, and we brought it as an element that in each part becomes a different, you know, way it's articulated. And you can see it's a full arch, and then as the exhibition goes through, it dematerializes and just becomes part of an arch. Um, it was also celebration of women, celebration of you know women fashion designers who have a multi-million-dollar now industry just operating basically online, I would say. And so that yeah, this lighting pattern, oh, I experienced this, and I was, I have to, the issue is, Louis, this is the so it was very exciting. It was very controversial because the way people were I mean it you know, after the Muslim ban in United States, there has been a discussion why one targets one group and one religion and not respect it and understand it. These coverings, or most of the costumes that people of the area wear, is mainly to protect them from the environment. I mean, it's hot, it's sandy, and it's so men have pretty much the same coverings too. They wear long abayas, and they have turbans and so on. um, Iranian women don't have a choice and have to wear the headscarf, which is, I think, um, a problem. I don't support that, because it should be a choice if you want to wear the headscarf or not. This was, in that sense, also very important, because we wanted to show the world, the Western world, that this world is not something that is impenetrable. So you can see the existing walls and ceiling of the exhibition is all painted in black. It's almost like a veil, a black veil that is scary, and you don't know what's behind it and so on in the Western world. But when you go in, everything is white, everything is dynamic, everything is modern, and all the women or mannequins are on a pedestal wearing these beautiful, costumes. So it was very well received. It was in all the TV stations, and they filmed it. So we are very pleased that we got an opportunity, because every opportunity is also about saying something, about educating the world. We are ambassadors that bring people together through our art, through our culture, through what we create, and and the fact that most of the designers in the exhibition actually were women um, from the Middle East, and then they selected us as kind of women architects to do the exhibition also meant a lot to us
No,
because a
I'm
lot.
pretty sure.
Yes,
What? I'm sorry. Sorry.
go ahead.
No, I
So
was even. I was just going to say something about architecture. I mean, architecture is about taking chances and making a statement. And I think that the exhibition is quite important because it goes beyond fashion. We can see that it goes beyond the, I don't know, sort of the superficial idea that you could have of fashion. But fashion at the same time is also a statement. It's also a very cultural. I think it's very important to talk about it and how architecture manages to do the same thing. I mean, architecture is like the built testimonial of historic times, economic period, social changes. Anything can be, translated into architecture. So I think it's very important to take the chances and making those statements
right.
and what you create. And I think it's very interesting to see not only in the exhibition of Muslim fashion, but in terms of all your work. And I wanted to ask just two things because I know that we're now we have. I don't want to bother you anymore with these questions and this talk. But there's something very important that you mentioned with the Muslim fashion exhibition, and it's something that we talked before the interview. In terms of, we all know that Middle East has so much culture and so many things we can learn about Middle Eastern culture and arts and creation. So me as an architectural history professor, I usually think that we're also focused on teaching things from the ancient Rome, ancient Greece, which is fine, of course. I won't, I am not against those things. It's fine. But what about Middle East? It's important to learn about all over the cultures all over the world. So for you, for example, if I ask you what's the most important thing about Iran, for example, what,
Right.
what,
I
I know it's a
have
very tough question, but something that you
no,
could.
it's actually a very relevant question because we've been thinking about it and talking about it. There are two things that have I think we have to question in teaching of architecture actually to young architects. One is um, the fact that everything that we teach and all the ideas that we are presenting to the schools of architecture is from the point of view of male architects that has existed. I think it's time again to study, to document, and to make sure students of architecture get both points of views.
Mm,
Maybe before it was not possible, but today is definitely possible to have both points of views in terms of architecture and construction of architecture,
yeah.
celebrated and be studied by students. The other one is history. History of architecture, as you mentioned, starts from the Greece, from the Greek time. Hello, Iranians have a culture that is 5,000 years old. China has even a culture that is longer than Iranian culture. I think it's arrogant. I think it's pompous to eliminate the most beautiful cultures in earth because we have no knowledge of it, perhaps, or we think they are not valuable. There is a wisdom in, and look, sustainability is become a fashion of the day today. Iranians have sustainable towns, not just sustainable buildings. I mean, we have towns that are built around
Yeah.
sustainability with the thicknesses of the walls, with the way they bring water and store it on the lower floor, with the way they catch the wind and use it, in cooling their buildings. So without electricity, without ruining our environment. Now, why do we have to learn it from? what we have learned, what I have learned from Greek architecture is symbolism of power. How to make these stone tall big columns, and 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 make a statement about the power of the country. It's fine. I think we need to learn that. We need to understand that. But the organic architecture that is very earth related, very nature related, it lives and is still, I think, worthwhile understanding in many, many different countries. More than that, I think one of the earliest urban spaces is in Iran. The Isfahan, square is one of the oldest public squares that existed before even the Europeans and the Greeks and Romans knew anything about having a very large public space, a hole in the middle of a town. I come from a point of view that it's time for us to review teaching of architecture, because you have to start from the base. You can't just haphazardly do that. And that is, it's time to start teaching students of architecture who are now 80%, 70% women, how women think about space, how women think about relating to architecture, to our urban fabric, to our streets. And then how do we teach them about what existed before? What is the wisdom of these old cultures that are now maybe buried? They are underneath, but we need to dig out and bring up and showcase and have them learn from it. A lot of Latin American cultures have that. Do we teach that in schools of architecture? Not really. It's a very little, maybe chapter, I don't know, on Mexican or Mayan culture and so on. So I think culture of a place is important. We as architects today, as global practitioners, go to these different countries. Instead of taking your Louis Vuitton bag there, I think you should go there and see what they have and use their local, kind of culture and local traditions in terms of living, in terms of working, and do something unique that is for that place and that culture. And so that's what my hope is for the future generations. As I discussed with you before, to me, architecture is not a fashion, in fact. Even though fashion and architecture have always had a relationship to one another, it's almost like the same terminology, the fabric of a building, the exterior, outer wear of the building, the interior of the building, and so on and so forth. But the fact is, it's not about fashion of the day. It's about creating something that is timeless in architecture, because it's a lot of time and effort and money that is spent on a work to that has to remain for generations of people to enjoy and for architects to learn from. So these kind of isms that come and go, postmodernism, deconstructivism, those are all about form. And to make a crazy form that then maybe a year or two later no one wants and no one likes, I think is useless. We need to create something, again, that is always remains, and always when we go, we are bewildered and we are, kind of, as you said, actually, we are touched. We experience it and we take it with us, and it always remains with you. So can one create that with fashion? I think yes. Fashion as an art form has a capacity to do that. And there are things that you keep forever. What they call is, it's a classic, and we do it with art, not every art is art, not every literature or piece of writing is what we call literature. but some things, you know, remain forever. And
Yeah.
every time you read it is something new and you have a new understanding. So that is, I think, what is at stake here. Louis, are you there? Oh.
No,
Are
yeah, I
we
was
at the
looking
end?
for a
Are we at the end
yeah.
of? Uh-huh.
I was just looking for a book. In speaking of things
Uh,
that are timeless, and one of my favorite poets of all time is Khalil Gibran.
uh-huh.
And I
Khalil
have this old
Gibran.
book. Yeah,
Yes, yes. I
touched.
have that
Uh,
too. Yes. Or for that matter, Rumi. I mean, I was so surprised that musicians in New York,
yeah,
dancers, create modern performances with poetry of Rumi, who is Iranian. You know, Omar Khayyam, uh, so well known. So there are there is a work of art that can become universal, that become timeless, and relate to something that we all share. My hope is that one day I can create one of those.
yeah. Completely, totally. Well, I'm very happy for this talk. Extremely happy. You have no idea. I mean, I'm in a mixture between being a starstruck, talking to you right now, and also because it's so.
Louis, you are a professor. I am in awe of you and what you're doing, and also this, thank
No,
you.
no. I mean, it's been very inspirational because I mean, we have been talking so much about so many important things that to me are extremely relevant right now for architecture. I mean, having the sensibility to understand landscape, for example,
Right,
having the sensibility to understand the people that are going to live in the building, for example, and making living as an experience where you can feel nature, when you can breathe, I don't know, the experience of architecture, considering a building not just bricks and concrete and steel and glass. No,
correct,
it's a piece
correct,
of artwork. It's a piece of jewelry
right,
that it's not only ornamental or something aesthetic. It's something that's useful and helpful, not for just human use, but also for nature, also for environment. I don't know. It's very complex. It's a very
yeah,
complex field
yes,
that we're living.
that's
So
very
that's
true.
why I'm very happy for this interview because it's been like a huge masterclass. How to be, I won't say better architects, but maybe being better people in terms of creating and designing things. And how do we project our knowledge to the world as well? I mean,
Right,
uh, for me, I think the world is completely there are no boundaries. We have to learn about other cultures. We have to learn about other languages, other experiences, and architecture is like a huge fan,
yes,
full of
I
colors
completely,
and full
yes,
of
right,
culture and full of expression. So
right,
I always, I always uh, I tell to my students that I always say like, you have to watch films, you have to listen to music, you have to read, you have to take a look at art in general, and only focus on what we are teaching, because architecture is like it's like a huge fan. So
right.
yeah, okay. Well,
Well,
I
are we kind of getting to the end of our
I,
discussion?
I think so because
Yeah.
I mean I told you it was going to be only a 50-minute talk, and
It, when you start an architect, it never ends. They go
that's
on
true.
and
That's
on
true.
and on. Well, there is so much to talk about these days. But what I wanted to just leave with the young architects, maybe who have joined us, is to be a great architect, you don't have to be kind of mean, pompous, and arrogant. Um, I think, um, in contrast, to be a great architect, you have to be competent, creative, and kind, with a lot of empathy for humanity, with respect for other cultures, for other religions, for other histories, and for the environment, for our climate. Um, so keep that in mind. You don't need to become, because I mean, I've been around for a long time, And I have met so many architects that with one project, they think they are such important people and become very um, arrogant human beings. I think it's especially now that we are all experiencing this kind of global pandemic
Mm.
around and see suffering of people. I think humanity is something that as architects should inspire us, working for humanity and working for create a world that is more human than greed, than, you know, I want it all and I want this, and, you know, competitions, and again this kind of a negative energy. I really think the nature is telling something to us. We are um, rebalancing all the bad things that we have done, all the harm that we have brought to our planet, our earth, um, all the impacts that we have had through, you know, gases that are not good for our health, all the buildings that we have that the windows don't open so we don't have fresh air. It's almost, we need lungs, we need to breathe. And if you just for 2 seconds think about it, the best things in life are for free. I mean, we don't pay for water, we don't pay for air to breathe. It's given to us. And, you know, for us not to understand how precious they are and how to use it without waste, without with humility, um, I think it's something we need to consider in the future, and especially future generations of architects.
Wow. I was going to ask you that. You read my mind, okay? To finish this talk. It was just wonderful. Gisue, I have no words to describe how thankful and grateful I am for this talk. I have learned a lot. I think that each and everyone that's been watching this live stream has learned a lot. And I will never forget this talk, definitely. It's been a
Louis,
huge experience.
I wait for you to come to New York first, and I meet you here, and then together we go to Iran, because we
Of
want to
course.
take the pods to Iran, and that's the
And you
goal.
and your sister are extremely welcome here in Chile, especially in Concepcion.
Thank you
So,
very much. I
no,
send you
thanks
all
to
my
you.
love and respect. Thank you very, very much.
No,
Appreciate it.
thanks to you. And well, I'm going to give you the link of the interview later so you can take a look
Okay.
at
Okay.
after.
Best
Okay.
regards. Have a good evening.
To you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.